we have discussed some of the themes from the first chapter of the first book. And the first chapter is entitled The Way of What is to Come. And in it, after the prophetic quotations from the scripture, the 3 from Isaiah and the 1 from John, really the very first part, which is the result of Jung's inspiration, is the discourse about the spirit of the time and the spirit of the deep, or the depths, and therefore I will read some of that one for you. After all, that's the very beginning, and in many ways it's important because it begins this is the beginning of the process. In many ways, we might say that this is what we have to hear. We have to hear the spirit of the deep calling to us, and have to respond. In fact, probably it's calling all the time, but we are not listening. It's a little bit like Blavatsky's story that I told on Thursday night, that a lady was going around very happy about Blavatsky's pronouncement that we have the God within. She said, the divine is within me, the divine light, that the God is within me. And Blavatsky, after a while, couldn't take it, and she said, yes, and I hear him snoring. No, but again, I don't want to get just started on that, but I just throw out this one that really sort of puts in focus that offhand remark of Blavatsky, the difference between what I like to call the ontological issue and the existential issue. Ontology is the science of being in philosophy. And there are a lot of things that you can accept ontologically. Yeah, this is so, that is so, and that is so. But are you really experiencing it? It's one thing to admit that something may be so, but it's another thing to really get involved in it within yourself. And I think we have a lot of trouble with that generally in our culture. We establish a condition and we feel that's how it is. But here is then really the very beginning of the Red Book after the initial quotations, on which he does not comment on. But this, he says, if I speak in the spirit of this time, I must say, no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. Justification is superfluous to me, since I have no choice, but I must. I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. Namely, the spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, and my humanity still thinks this way, but that other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use, and meaning. Filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptuous spirit of the times, I long sought to hold that other spirit away from me. But I did not consider that the spirit of the depths, from time immemorial and for all the future, possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of real judgment. He took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining and ordering things. And he let devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produces the supreme meaning. That is what I was talking about before. But the supreme meaning is the path, the way, and the bridge to what is to come. That is the God yet to come. It is not the coming God himself, but his image, which appears in the supreme meaning. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the images of supreme meaning. That's probably enough of that part. A little more sort of samples from that chapter. The spirit of this time in me wanted to recognize the greatness and extent of the supreme meaning, but not its littleness. The spirit of the depths, however, conquered this arrogance, and I had to swallow the small as a means of healing the immortal in me. It completely burned up my innards, since it was inglorious and unheroic. It was even ridiculous, but the pliers of the spirit of the depths held me, and I had to drink the bitterest of all draughts. The spirit of this time tempted me with the thought that all this belongs to the shadowiness of the God image, and it goes from there. So this is kind of the first and the initial call and the response to it. And it's of course something that we all have to keep in mind, because while this call may not come to us in the exact manner in which it came to Jung, it nevertheless has to come to us as well. That is how his process of change, his process of transformation begins. The next vision that comes, of course, is the vision of his soul, where he calls out to his soul, and it comes and answers to him, and for that time on, then the soul really remains with him. And this is how that occurs. And this, of course, these sentences have become somewhat famous now, because it being such a powerful passage, in the various little commentaries and so forth of the Red Book, they always quote this: "My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you, are you there? I have returned, I am here again. I have shaken the dust of all the lands from my feet, and I have come to you, I am with you. After long years of long wandering, I have come to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noise of life and the world? But one thing you must know. The one thing I have learned is that one must live this life. This life is the way, the long sought after way to the unfathomable, which we call divine. There is no other way. All other ways are false paths. I found the right way. It led me to you, to my soul. I returned tempered and purified. Do you still know me? How long the separation lasted? Everything has become so different. And how did I find you? How strange my journey was. What words should I use to tell you on what twisted paths a good star has guided me to you? Give me your hand, my almost forgotten soul. How warm the joy at seeing you again, you long disavowed soul. Life has led me back to you. Let us thank the life I have lived for all the happy and all the sad hours, for every joy, for every sadness. My soul, my journey should continue with you. I will wander with you and ascend to my solitude. The spirit of the depths forced me to say this, and at the same time to undergo it against myself, since I had not expected it then. I still labored misguidedly on the spirit of this time and thought differently about the human soul. I thought and spoke much of the soul before. I spoke about something I didn't know and didn't understand. I knew many learned words for her. I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. I did not consider that my soul cannot be the object of my judgment and knowledge. Much more are my judgment and knowledge the objects of my soul. Therefore, the spirit of the depths forced me to speak to my soul, to call upon her as a living and self-existing being. I had to become aware that I had lost my soul. This is, the great call that he puts forth, and then the soul comes to him. Let me see. One of the matters that needs to be considered, because it returns again and again, and it sounds so subtle, is his statement. It's going to say, I have learned. What thing that I have learned is that one must live this life. And, what is that? Well, isn't that what we all are doing? Do we have to get that from a red book? Yeah, but, there is a special intention, a special meaning here, because what is meant and what reveals itself subsequently in the book, that living the life is when we are able to bring into our nature the requisite amount of wholeness, so that we can live the life with as much fullness as possible. And before that happens, we are not really living the life that we should. I'll give you kind of a little analogy, which may or may not be useful, because all of these analogies and similes break down. But I well remember, for instance, walking on a particular street in Hollywood, up toward the Hollywood Hills, innumerable occasions, because I was always going somewhere. And of course, I was sort of basically aware of what's around the different houses and so forth. And then one time I just kind of got into a much more pensive and observing mood, and I looked around, and it seemed to me as if the countryside and the houses and block after block were areas that were places that I'd never seen before. They didn't change. They were just the same as they were before. But there was something happening with me. All of a sudden I was seeing. All of a sudden I was observing. All of a sudden I received all that detail, and I said, well, this is sort of the way the full life ought to be lived. It is the result of what? Well, there are all kinds of words, and to most people, they are just words. Mindfulness and attention and this, that, and the other thing. But the objective is that such powers of observation and such concentrated attention and such awareness should not be a temporary exercise. It should be with us. It should be part of our lives. That is truly the life. And the more we live that life in that fashion, the more the process of interior transformation, of the transforming growth by way of the union of the opposites and so forth will take place. And so here again, his attention is called to that fact, and he says, well, you know, I've been trying to do that, and I'm trying to do it now. And that is sort of what really gives him the power and the justification and the merit that allows him to meet his soul again and to bring the soul back. So again and again in the course of the book, this statement of go and live your life comes and appears and comes into play. So now, inasmuch as there's this great big book here, and the time is small, we sort of have to jump around a little bit and try to see in at least in main outline form how this process of transformation takes place. There are many, many individual instances which could be mentioned and which are not really the big points, the big transformational points or the big stepping stones, but still interesting. For instance, one that is quite amusing in a way, and that Jung had mentioned. There is some indication of it in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections here and there, and people made all kinds of strange things out of it. They came to strange conclusions. Is the chapter of the killing of Siegfried. Now, he sees himself in the company of a smallish, darker fellow, obviously, well, not obviously, but in great likelihood his shadow, and they are going out in the countryside, in the mountains, to a mountain pass, and they have I think one or two rifles with them. He certainly has an old-fashioned rifle with him, and they are waiting for Siegfried to come. And so after a while, there's big hullabaloo, you know, great drama, and over the mountain pass comes Siegfried, and holding his shield, and he has a chariot and all kinds of things. His long hair is flowing, and Jung has to shoot him. And he does. And the little dark fellow helps him to do it. And then he says, well, why did I have to do that? He says, I neither like Siegfried or dislike Siegfried. It's not one of my favorite mythological figures or my least favorite mythological figures. And then the insight comes to him that Siegfried is his own heroic ego. So you see, we all like to see ourselves as some sort of a conquering hero. So he was the conquering hero, because, and you know, certainly from an external point of view he was. You got to remember that when Jung wrote this, when these events took place, he was really, even though he wasn't quite 40 years old, I think. Well, he was born in 1875, in the year of the foundation of the TS. You figure it out. But in any event, you know, he was just in midlife. He was very famous. The people just revered him in Switzerland. People came to him from all over the world, you know, for therapy and things like that. He was training therapists. And beside that, he had a nice house, he had a nice income, he had a nice wife, he had children, he had, you know, everything. So he felt in his ego self that he was conquering the world. He was the conquering Siegfried, you know. And yet now, when this process began, one of the first things that had to be done was that he had to shoot this image of the conquering hero down. And he said, you know, whatever else may be happening, your purpose is not to conquer the world, figuratively speaking. You know, your purpose is something else. There's great big internal conquest. There's great big internal journey to undertake. And if anybody is even slightly familiar with the literature, the biographies and the this and that, and the people have written about Jung. And now, after reading the Red Book, I think I could easily throw half of them away because they are so off in what they are doing. They came up with things like, Siegfried was Freud. Now, if there are two figures that are more unlike each other than the Siegfried of Germanic lore and Sigmund Freud, well, then I don't know who it is. And extremely different figures. I mean, all sorts of things like that, because Freud's name is Sigmund, and then there is Siegfried, so it had to be the same one. But of course, obviously, very different figures. And also, while it's not so terribly meaningful, it's interesting that this is a typical Swiss scene, The Swiss obtained their independence from Germany way back in the early Middle Ages by Wilhelm Tell, the hero, waylaying the imperial governor, you might say, in a mountain pass and shooting him. At that time, they didn't have any rifles yet. So it's to waylay people in the mountains and to off them in that manner. It's very Swiss. It's almost as Swiss as cheese and cuckoo clocks, See, this is not. I mean, it's not that the ego as such cannot be killed. If the ego is the carrier of consciousness, it's your lesser mind, and if you kill that, then you become an imbecile. You haven't got what it takes to live. But what it is here is really the persona. And the projected persona of the individual as the heroic person who conquers the world. It's your self-esteem, or let's say maybe too much self-esteem. And the problem with us, I think, in this world is that we want to esteem that kind of self, of ourselves, which is not that worthy of esteem. We want to feel very good about a certain self of ours, which is not worth feeling good about. And yet we make no contact with the other self that is the estimable and that is the important self. So this one, apparently, at least in Jung's transformation, this is the sort of one of the initial steps to do that. It's not all that tremendously important, but it's a lovely little chapter, and the little initial picture on it is really downright funny, because here are these two almost cartoon characters, sitting there waiting to shoot Siegfried, who is coming down the road, waving his shield in the air and all that, and then they've got him. So in any event, this is one of the earlier steps. Now, what we need to look at is I have sort of outlined, and I think this is pretty accurate, what you might say are the major points in the transformation in the Red Book. And the first is just a very act of descent into the deep unconscious. And the metaphor for this was actually a descent. After he heard the voice of the deep, and then he was sitting at his desk, and a sort of chasm, or sort of big hole opened in front of him in his mind's eye. And he went deeper and deeper and deeper. And then he came to a sort of a cave, and there the archetypes were beginning. There was a river, and in the river there was a scarab, and there was a body that was floating, which was sort of the dead self, and the mysterious solar entity, the scarab, with whom he deals later on too. And that was the beginning. Then he kept going. So the descent, the initial descent, that's really the first truly major steps. The others kind of organize themselves around it. And then comes one, I'll read to you probably some little parts about it, that's really very interesting. Various little incidents here and there that are not that essential to the story. And then he comes and meets a curious couple. An old man accompanied by a young woman, and as so often in the Red Book, a great big snake that keeps them company. They're sort of these pet snakes are everywhere, and some of them are very nice and very benign, and others less so. And he comes to them, and he finds out that the old man is Elijah, and the youngish woman who is with him is Salome. And he doesn't just use these names, but Elijah is really Elijah, the prophet Elijah from the Bible. And Salome, in turn, is, Salome who danced like Marilyn Monroe in one of the movies when they had her hypnotized, and whenever they said Salome, she started dancing. And then she kind of misunderstood, and even when they said salami, she was dancing. Really stupid stuff, but just a little analogy. Anyway, this is the Salome who dances in front of King Herod in the Bible, and she's his stepdaughter or something like that, and persuades him with her dance and so forth to have John the Baptizer executed. That's the same Salome. And so this couple now comes to him and invites him to come in, and they begin a conversation. Now, and then, of course, some very, very great and very, very amazing things happen subsequently. But Elijah, of course, is how should I put it, is a perennial archetypal figure of the deathless prophet, because Elijah is one of those who has never died. Elias in Greek, and so because of that, things, Elijah had been the figure of prophetic contact with the divine in a lot of places. You find him in the prophetic Kabbalah of Abulafia, for instance, who was a famous Kabbalist who really sort of called attention to the immediate mystical aspects of the Kabbalah. And his big question would always, you are you a Kabbalist? Yes. Have you seen Elijah? And so the guy said, no, they go away. And because the seeing of Elijah was when the deathless realm has come and calls to the individual. So Elijah is sort of the representation of the prophetic principle and the prophetic messenger from above, and in this case, really an initiator into the mysteries of the self. I had a friend who lived for a number of years in Greece, and he noted while crawling around on the various Greek islands and so forth that various churches of different signs, churches and chapels, were placed by the Greeks on the top of quite on the top of the mountains. and they each were dedicated to Saint Elias, to Elijah. And when discussing this with a scholar, they said, well, you know, Elias is very similar to Helios, who is Helios. We call it Helios, but the H is silent, who is the sun god who rides in his chariot. And what did Elijah do but get picked up by a chariot taken above? And so sort of he's the successor of the light that rides in the chariot. Now Salome is a different kind of a creature, because she's definitely represented in the New Testament as a villain, somebody who causes the death of a very important and a very holy person. But as Jung indicates, why is Salome the one who causes the death of John the Baptist? Now, who is John the Baptist? He's the forerunner. He's the one who is there before the Messiah comes. And for the Messiah to truly come, the forerunner has to be out of the way. So that what she is accomplishing may look like something horrible, and very often the killing of a person in dreams and things of that sort means their change, their transformation. So we have right now in the world and in our consciousness, we have sort of figures who are like John the Baptist. They are forerunners of greater things to come, and they will have to give way to the greater. If we don't allow that to happen, if we are hanging on to the old, then the new will never come. And so there's a great metaphor here about Salome, and Salome continues to appear throughout the entire Red Book. At a certain point, Elijah sort of goes away. He's no longer there. And for one thing, he has, like Jung says, all Elijah is concerned with is predicting things about the future. He's always prophesying. And so Jung gets kind of tired of that. He says, come on, you know, I want to know what to do right now, and I don't need all those prophets. Then Elijah, but that's a bit later. But Salome keeps appearing and sort of represents a very passionate, a very emotional quality or force. She's always coming to Jung, and much of the time she asks him, well, why don't you love me? Do you love me? And things of that sort. And you can see why that probably occurs too, because if after he has gone in Elijah's door, into Elijah's house, and they interact there for a while, the whole episode with Elijah and Salome, which goes on for 2 or 3 chapters, eventually there comes about an incredible scene. So Jung understands that now he is going to undergo some kind of a really very powerful experience, and it's also dangerous, and they lead him up on a hill, and before he knows it, he finds himself stretched out on a cross. The snake crawls up on him and is wound around him, a little bit like in the statues of Mithra, you know. And Salome stands below, and she asks, well, you know, what is happening? And they tell him, well, you are undergoing now the experience of Christ. And so he hangs there, and finally a sort of great epiphany, a great change comes upon it, and great light. And by the way, Salome all along was blind. she was holding the hand of Elijah all the time. And when this is happening, Jung is having the experiences. Salome stands underneath the cross, and all of a sudden she can see. So his crucifixion experience had restored her sight. Now what do we have there? You got to remember that this is a time when the majority, practically all of the concepts which have become sort of the shibboleths, really, I mean, they're bandied about all the time, primarily by Jungians, but others too, have not been articulated yet by Jung. He hadn't written yet about anima and animus. He hadn't written about a lot of things. All that came later. And so this is a very, very direct statement of the restoring the feminine within himself to consciousness, to the sight. Seeing is always the symbol of consciousness. So that by her sight being restored in this manner, she now has become conscious. And then she reappears from time to time again, and she adds a sort of really quite beautiful emotional tone and emotional element to the process of transformation. Of course, Jung, especially in the early part, I mean, he's still pretty naive, and you can see that. And he didn't excise the evidence of this naivete from the book. It's very, he's very honest about it. I mean, much of the time he's just a very tough little argumentative Swiss guy. I can just could see him there. Hey, hey Elijah, what are you trying to say? What's going on around here? I don't understand all of this. Come on, there are very, very frequent argumentations like that, and then the various figures whom he's dealing with. Come on now, sort of simmer down, wait a while, and then you will know what is happening. But he's not this kind of spaniel-eyed devotee who goes around, oh yeah, how wonderful this, how wonderful that, and of course doesn't understand anything, but has this kind of very pious attitude. But he's very, very, very argumentative, very demanding. I want to know more. How is this going on? What is happening? A sort of, no doubt, symbolizing to a certain extent the acumen of consciousness that has to be there in our experiences. It's Mr. Manly Hall, my dear old patron of years ago, whom I still miss so greatly. I was lecturing at his Philosophical Research Society for well over 30 years. And some of that time, Mr. Hall was there himself. And so Mr. Hall said, he said, in my life, I encountered many people who were telling me of their most astonishing experiences, which, however, inevitably were without any essential meaning. He was a very kind man, but he also he told it like it was, and this is what happens when we have, and I firmly believe that just about, well, certainly all of us in this room, but all of us are capable of very important spiritual experiences, which would be very useful to us and very helpful to us. But even though these experiences come to us to some extent, we don't recognize them, we don't derive any meaning from them. So it's not enough to have an experience. There has to be somebody home who is the experiencer. But when the real, the evaluating consciousness of the person is out to lunch, then something's happening, but there is no essential meaning derived from it. And by meaning, we have to, and it's certainly evident in various pages of a Red Book, on the meaning we don't understand, say, it's not intellectual meaning. It's not that this means that. It's something different. It's very hard to explain. But there is a kind of explosion of understanding, a rising up of something within ourselves, and that is real psychic meaning. The kind of meaning that makes us different. We have understood something, and now as the result of that understanding, as the result of that gnosis, all of a sudden we are different. That's why, you might say, that's why throughout the story, Jung so often is there as he questions and he evaluates and he asks and he badgers some of the figures because he's there, he's present. You know? And why is that? Well, first of all, he seems to have had the ability and the capacity from a very early time of his life to stand within his more authentic selfhood. And you know, when that seemed to have happened for the first time, and he said so himself, was when he was a little kid, he was walking down the street, and I think it was in Basel, he saw God sitting on his throne, and he saw something unsavory dropping from the throne onto the big church in Basel, of which I think actually Jung's grandfather was the dean at one time, you know. And you know, a little kid and a minister's son for that, because that's what Jung was, and he had, I think, no less than 8 or 9 close relatives who were all ministers. How the poor guy survived with that many preachers in his family, I don't know, but he did. And so he was terrified. I mean, it's a sacrilegious vision, and he stood there crying and struggling with this strange vision, and then all of a sudden somehow he experienced an inner change, and this strange vision, which to us, if we want to interpret, would sort of probably indicate the disapproval of heaven of what the church is doing, right? But I don't know whether he thought it through that way, but he got a meaning inside of him. And some of his better biographers, like Bennett and others, say that Jung had then communicated to us that that was the first time when he really became himself, when he was able to face up to this unpleasant vision. So we may need to keep that in mind too, that when things come to us that go against our grain, it's not usually useful to chase them away. But let's see what it is telling us. Let's see what kind of effect it is going to have. We don't want the archetypal psyche or the divine or whatever you want to call it to just reaffirm what we believe already and what we know already, you know, things like that. But what's the point of that? You know, we are already in that place, to put it metaphorically. But when something strange, perhaps even really different and disturbing and shocking comes to us, stand our ground and look at it and try to have the experience reveal to us its meaning. It's coming to us for a purpose. It isn't just happening. And Jung pretty much maintained that attitude, you know, subsequently in his life. But I have digressed from Salome and Elijah, and so there is definitely a major, what we would call probably in in ancient terms and also in occult terms, we would call an initiation experience. By being crucified on the cross with the snake and having Salome standing at the foot of the cross and reacquiring her sight, Jung undergoes a tremendous change, a tremendous enlightenment, you might say. So this is the first really big, major marker of his transformation. There is a definite big transformation taking place there. This, incidentally, which had sort of leaked out from Red Book material somewhere, Jung mentioned an experience of this sort, although I don't think he owned up to it at that time. It happened to him, but it was conjectured by others, and this was used against Jung by this rascal Knoll, who had written two very nasty books about Jung, the Aryan Christ and the Jung cult or something like that. He said that Jung had made himself into God, he deified himself, and he made himself into Christ, he made himself into Mitra, all kinds of things like that. But actually, it is a transformational experience, and things like this are not that rare. We need to remember that the very method, as far as we are able to discern, because after a lot of that stuff was secret, of the mysteries in antiquity, like the Eleusinian mysteries of Dionysus and Orpheus and all the rest of them, really consisted at a certain point in the process of the individual becoming in consciousness the God. In the Eleusinian mysteries, everybody became Persephone, man or woman, and undergoes that experience because the certain events in the story of the gods and the goddesses have tremendous transformative meaning to the individual. And so that it was really an identification of that mythic figure with the person himself or herself. And that's the kind of thing that you have here. And so then Jung gets off the cross, the snake crawls away, and Salome is, of course, very happy seeing, and he discovers that he has to move on. So he says goodbye to Elijah, and rather happily moves on. The next major encounter is really with the master, with Philemon, who becomes his major influence and his major teacher right up to the end of the book. But I'll come to that a little later. In between, there are various stories, you might say, visionary stories, which all in various ways tend to tell really the same thing. And that is, of course, none other but the presence in him, in the world, around him, but primarily within himself, of a great divine being who needs to be helped, needs to awaken in some fashion. There are several like this. And one of them that Jung comes across is a god. And the god's name is Izdubar. And Dr. Shamdasan, in his commentaries and so, indicates that this was a sort of modified name of a Babylonian deity. And Izdubar is not well, shall we put it that way, Gods get sick too. And Jung is talking to him, and Jung welcomes him. He's very, is very happy to see this being. Izdubar is a gigantic figure. There is a painting in here which depicts Izdubar. So Jung converses with him, and Izdubar asks him various questions about what is going on in the world, and Izdubar is pretty terrified of what is happening in the modern world as to how materialistic people have gotten and everything. It says, oh, it's just terrible. It's practically futile. We can't do anything. And he gets weaker and weaker, and he lies down, and he's dying. So Jung realizes that he somehow has to help this God to live. But how is he going to do it? For one thing, the God is so huge and so big that Jung can't even push him, he can't even move him. So an inspiration comes to him, and he does some kind of magical act. Now get this, he shrinks Izdubar, this huge giant, he shrinks him up into an egg. Not egg in yuan, in an egg. And the egg is of not very big, because, and this egg Jung can carry. So he wants to go and find a place now where he can bring Izdubar back to life. So Jung is the magical agent of a resurrection of this dying God. And so he's walking along with Izdubar in the egg on his shoulder, and they go through the countryside. And Jung is looking for a place that would be nice and peaceful enough to accomplish this magical deed. So they go past a village, and Izdubar says, a little town, Izdubar says, well, how about that place? And Jung says, oh no, he says, you know, the people there are very bad. They are all materialists, they are all rationalists, they all think that they worship science, and you know, the place would be very inhospitable to our purposes. And then they go on. Finally, they find a place, kind of a deserted house, where he brings the egg. And then what is perhaps the most beautiful part of the, at least I feel so poetically, of the Red Book occurs, because it's extremely moving and it's extremely beautiful. So there is the egg, and Jung sits down by the egg, and there come what are called the incantations. Actually, in the German title, it's in singular. So they are all connected with each other. It's the incantation. And with this, you know, incantation means really enchantment. Cantare means chant. And so they sit there, and it's Christmas. So Jung begins these magical incantations which come to him, which are going to heal and revive the dying God. And I'll read them to you one after the other. They're really quite beautiful. Christmas has come. The God is in the egg. I have prepared a rug for my God, an expensive red rug from the land of mourning. He shall be surrounded by the shimmer of magnificence of his eastern land. I am the mother, the simple maiden who gave birth and did not know how. And he identifies this with the Christmas story. I am the careful father who protected the maiden. I am the shepherd who received the message as he guarded his herd at night in the dark field. I am the holy animal that stood astonished and cannot grasp the becoming of the God. I am the wise man who came from the east suspecting the miracle from afar. And I am the egg that surrounds and nurtures the seed of the God in me. You can see that this is a dramatization of the healing and the awakening of the God within, that Izdubar is in us. And each one of these has a picture with it, an image, which are largely sort of mandala-like structures that somewhere in the drawing contain the image of the egg, and they change one after the other. You can look at them later. The solemn hours lengthen, and my humanity is wretched and suffers torment. Since I am a giver of birth, whence do you delight me, O God? He is the eternal emptiness and the eternal fullness. Nothing resembles him, and he resembles everything. Eternal darkness and eternal brightness, eternal below and eternal above, double nature in one. So once again, the union of the opposites, the philosopher's stone, is always there. Simple and manifold, meaning in absurdity, freedom in bondage, subjugated when victorious, old in youth, yes in no. O light of the middle way, enclosed in the egg, embryonic, full of ardor, oppressed, fully expectant, dreamlike, awaiting lost memories, as heavy as stone, hardened, molten, transparent, streaming bright, coiled on itself. Here is a passage that in its structure, very reminiscent of some of the invocations of my old friends, the Gnostics. Amen, you are the Lord of the beginning. Amen, you are the star of the east. Amen, you are the flower that blooms over everything. Amen, you are the deer that breaks out of the forest. Amen, you are the song that sounds far over the water. Amen, you are the beginning and the end. One word that was never spoken, one light that was never lit up, an unparalleled confusion and a road without end. I forgive myself these words, as you also forgive me for wanting your blazing light. Rise up, you gracious fire of old night. I kiss the threshold of your beginning. My hand prepares the rug and spreads abundant red flowers before you. Rise up, my friend, you who lay sick. Break through the shell. We have prepared a meal for you. Gifts have been prepared for you. Dancers await you. We have built a house for you. Your servants stand ready. We drove herds together for you in green fields. We filled your cap with red wine. We set out fragrant fruit on golden dishes. We knock at your prison and lay our ears against it. The hours lengthen, tarry no longer. We are wretched without you, and our song is worn out. We are miserable without you, and wear out our songs. We spoke all the words that our heart gave us. What else do you want? What else shall we fulfill for you? We open every door for you. We bend our knees where you want us to. We go to all points of the compass according to your wish. We carry up what is below, and we turn what is above into what is below as you command. We give and take according to your wish. We wanted to turn right, but go left, obedient to your sign. We rise and we fall. We sway and we remain still. We see and we are blind. We hear and we are deaf. We say yes and no, always hearing your word. We do not comprehend, and we live that incomprehensible, the incomprehensible. We do not love, and we live unloved, and we evolve around ourselves again and comprehend and live the understandable. We love and live the loved true to your law. Come to us who are willing from our own will. Come to us who understand you from our own spirit. Come to us, we who will warm you at our own fire. Come to us, we who will heal you with our own art. Come to us who will produce you out of our own body. Come, child, to father and mother. We asked earth, we asked heaven, we asked sea, we asked wind, we asked fire. We looked for you with all the peoples, we looked for you with all the kings, we looked for you with all the wise. We looked for you in our heads and hearts, and we found you in the egg. I have slain a precious sacrifice for you, a youth and old man. I have cut my skin with a knife. I have sprinkled your altar with my own blood. I have banished my father and mother so that you can live with me. I have turned my night into your day and went about at midday like a sleepwalker. I have overthrown all the gods, broken the laws, eaten the impure. I have thrown down my sword and dressed in women's clothing. Well, now that's a new one. Certainly unusual in 1913 or 1914. I shattered my firm castle and played like a child in the sand. I saw warriors form into a line of battle and destroyed my suit of armor. With a hammer I planted my field and let the fruit decay. I made small everything that was great and made everything great that was small. I exchanged my furthest goal for the nearest, and so I am ready. And then is the opening of the egg, and the God comes forth from the egg. Jung greets him, and the God rises into the sky and goes off in an easterly direction. You know. Now, I have probably bored some of you with these long incantations, but this conveys, I think, the feeling tone of the book and of the operation so much better than some of the others. You can see what tremendous feeling and love and veneration he has for that God whom he is raising. And of course, the God ultimately is himself. And the egg, you may have come across that the egg has been represented as that which surrounds the individual human, called the aura by some, the egg of creation, the Orphic egg, and others, and it is the container out of which something that is seemingly dead comes. You may have, it's a pretty familiar figure now, or rather a very popular figure, that of Mary Magdalene. And in most of the old icons of Mary Magdalene, she holds the egg in her hand. And the story about that is that she's, of course, the witness to the resurrection. She's the first one who goes to the tomb and said, Jesus isn't there, that is risen. And so now she goes into the city and meets various people who had been disciples and who, associated with the group. She's trying to tell them that the Lord has risen. And she holds up the egg in saying that he has come out of the egg, just like the chicken comes out of the egg. He's come out of the tomb. He has come out of the grave. So it is, see, he's risen. And this is at least in a legendary sense, the beginning of the Easter egg. So there's much symbolism here, which one can read, especially if one knows some of the stories. And so Isdubar comes out and says, it happened that I opened the egg and that the God left the egg. He was healed and his figure shone transformed. I knelt like a child and could not grasp the miracle. He who had been pressed into the core of the beginning rose up, and no trace of illness could be found on him. And when I thought that I had caught the Mighty One and held him in my cupped hands, he was the sun itself. I wandered toward the east where the sun rises. I probably wanted to rise too, as if I were the sun. I wanted to embrace the sun and rise with it into daybreak. But it came toward me and stood in my way. It told me that I had no chance of reaching the beginning. And, behold, the god rose up into the sky and left. That's a very, it's probably the most elaborate of the stories that has to do with addressing oneself to the Godhead within. But just, I hope that at some point or the other, if you haven't done so already, you'll study the book yourself, then you will see that the theme of something latent, something almost dead, something obscured, something buried, needs to rise, needs to come into its own. And that is really sort of the great central theme around which everything organizes itself, and it's illuminated again and again with different visions that are all a story in themselves. So it always comes back to that. But of course, combined with that are such themes that you cannot just do this by will. You have to do it as the result of a process. And then at a certain, in fact, this is repeated at least 2 or 3 times, that the process, and it's very strange. At first, it's kind of wondering, what the heck is he talking about? Of course, you'll wonder in many different places. This is not a work that can be interpreted primarily rationally, but which really has to be apprehended intuitively. But he indicates that there are 3 phases of the great transformation. And this applies to the individual, and it applies to the world and to humanity. And they are very strange. He is told this by the one whom I'm going to talk about in a minute, namely Philemon. And he said there is war, magic, and religion. It's returned several times. Now what the heck does that mean? And when I saw the triple prophecy, or the 3 prophecies in one, I was immediately reminded that the poem of which is the introductory little verse of the Gospel of Thomas, where it is stated, "Let him who seeks keep seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will be troubled. And when he is troubled, he will wander. And when he has wandered, he will be the master over the all." So it starts with seeking, and of course, he does that through practically the entire book. It was the result of his seeking that he went down into the underworld. And there are all kinds of other journeys. There are journeys to heavenly realms. There are journeys to hell, really terrifying things. And then he always recognizes that he's told that these experiences are necessary for him for the transformation, because his transformation leads to wholeness rather than to only a partial transformation. Wholeness is more important than goodness, although goodness is part of wholeness. This keeps taking place. This keeps going on, and as he proceeds, war, magic, and religion, after the conflict, after the battle, after the conflagration, after being troubled, let's say, to use the words of the Gospel of Thomas, then there comes something else, and that is the magic. That is the skill whereby the transformation can be facilitated. And you don't have to think of any way in which you have understood magic before, but it's the skill, it's the spiritual art, it's the psycho-spiritual skill that we have to inquire, along with its sensitivity. For what it demonstrated, what he was doing with the incantations is obviously magical. In fact, if anybody has any knowledge, say, of how ceremonial magic is done, you can see very well that the principles are present in the incantations. But then comes, which he calls religion, but it could be called by other names too. I know religion has a bad name nowadays, and I never could quite understand why, because after all, in the essential sense, it means religio, how to join yourself back to reality, how to join yourself back to God. You know, religere means to rejoin. So the very word implies that we have become disjointed, and we have to rejoin, and that is really the essence of religion. Now, of course, religion has been embodied in various systems, and you know, the trouble with systems is that they are systems, and that's a trouble right there, because then the system becomes more important than the intention and then the essence, and then we begin to worship the system and we don't accomplish the work. A very, very fine gentleman whom some of you have probably met in the past, I'm sure. I had great, I don't hesitate to say I had great love for him, was John Coates, once the international president of the society, a terrific man. In any event, John Coates told, I'm sure he told it elsewhere, but he told it in a talk when I was present. He said, you know, what we are doing all the time, and we do it no matter what tradition we follow, is very much like some old English story. There was a farmer, and the farmer had bought a beautiful plow. And you know, I'm from the time when, back in my home country, when I still saw the plowing done with oxen and with you know, people walking behind the oxen with the plow. So it's a meaningful symbol to me now. He had this beautiful plow, and he really thought it was a terrific plow. So he polished it up very nicely, put it out in front of his house, and then he invited all the neighbors to come and look at his plow. And this went on and on and on. Every day he brought out the plow and wanted to show it to somebody else. And the plowing season was over, and he never used the plow. he only talked about it and only showed it off. So this is, to a great extent, you know, what happens with the systems. And whether the system is, I don't know, the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, who, by the way, and this is, you know, well-attested hagiography, which is the biography of the saints, that at the end of his life, toward the end of his life, he got up in the pulpit and he said, everything that I wrote, my theology, my Summa Theologia, and so it is just like straw. It doesn't amount to anything. He says, I have now experienced what God is really like. I have experienced the way to God, and all of this is nothing. Of course, they don't tell you that very often. And then there were other. So you know, this is the way when you see the system in its inadequacy, and you see what is, you know, what is beyond. So that is, of course, very often what happens. So we should not judge the essential intentionality, the essential trust and the work of real religion by the systems that have been built up around it. But when we discern what they are really about, then it's an entirely different bag of tricks. And so, as he says, when it comes from the magic to religion, that becomes the real experience of of the ultimate truth, of the real, and of the God within, of the God immanent and transcendent. And so the text keeps playing around with this theme. It's given to him, really, I think, initially by Philemon, whom I just mentioned, and I will just mention right now in a minute. It sort of indicates, yeah, you know, this is what has to happen in you, but this is also what is going to happen to humanity. But he is always very careful to be too concrete about these things. About the most concrete statement is just the one where he says that the new God will fully manifest, the new religion will be fully here 800 years from now. That's the only really specific thing that he says, and he always says, you have to realize that we are talking symbolical here, that all these things are symbolic. But of course, when you understand what Jung always meant by symbolic or symbol, it doesn't mean that it's something unreal. It doesn't mean that it's something, some folderol, but that these are statements which are the ciphers to the mystery. These are the words which will open up what really is there. So that's what he indicated by that. Now, in the middle of his long process, which started in 1913, and then more or less came to a conclusion, to a kind of temporary conclusion in 1916 with the 7 Sermons to the Dead. So kind of right in the middle, what 1914. Jung wrote first the passage in the Red Book that is called The Gift of Magic. And that is when some of these, he felt that some of these magical powers came to him. But he said he received the gift, but he didn't know what to do with it. You know? So, you know, I told you, okay, I'll initiate you, I'll give you the gift of magic, go home. But now what are you going to do? The event that follows is then well, in my estimation, yeah, the third hallmark of Jung's initiatory journey, and it forms a major section in the Liber Novus. So we obviously have to talk about it. In a dream, and that was not the visions of the book, but in a dream, more or less around this time, he first met an really impressive figure. And this is how he wrote about him elsewhere. It was an old man with horns of a bull. He held a bunch of 4 keys, one of which he clutched as if he were about to open a lock. He had the wings of the kingfisher with its characteristic colors. Since I did not understand this dream image, I painted it in order to impress it upon my memory. Jung sought out the figure in vision, and after, as he writes it, after a long search, I found a small house in the country fronted by a large bed of tulips. That delights my soul because that's one of the most frequent flowers in Hungary. You know, and there he found, so he first had a dream, then he was looking for this figure, and then he went into his altered state with the Red Book, and he traveled about in the Red Book, and that's when he found the house with the bed of tulips. And this is where Philemon lives, or the Greeks and people with the knowledge of Greek tell me that in Greek it really should be pronounced Philemon. But whichever way you pronounce it, it is the same thing. At first, Philemon appeared old, also a little bit feeble, and really not like someone who he felt could help him. But over the coming period, Philemon's mask of enfeeblement and of old age fell away and was transmuted, and he disclosed himself to Jung successively in more and more grandeur and importance. In his 1916, so right toward the end, passage and commentary on the Liber Novus, where he comments on the initial encounter with Philemon, Jung would pen a long ode to Philemon and express understandings recast by his further experience. And he says, "You know, O Philemon, the wisdom of things to come. Therefore you are old, so very ancient. And just as you tower above me in years, so you tower above the present in futurity, and the length of your past is immeasurable. You are legendary and unreachable. You were and will be, returning periodically. Your wisdom is invisible. Your truth is unknowable, entirely untrue in any given age and yet true in all eternity. But you pour out living water, from which the flowers of your garden bloom, and the starry water dew of the night." And so in the latter part, for many chapters of the Red Book, the constant references, constant dialogues with Philemon, and as it goes on, Jung becomes more and more impressed with the incredible power and wisdom of this individual, and he addresses him as Father and Father of the Light. So he has a deepening understanding of Philemon, which goes on really for so to say, which goes on for a number of the years in the transformation process. In the calligraph text, at the conclusion of the chapter, which I think is called The Magician, because he gets a gift of magic, he meets the magician, and initially Philemon is seen by him as an old magician. And then, of course, he reveals himself further and further. There he has on the painting of Philemon. And he did this painting in the book, and he has, so I was told by his great-grandson, Mr. Baumann, who was here with the exhibit. He is one of Jung's daughters, Margarete, married Baumann, so Mrs. Baumann, and her son was a medical doctor, and this is the medical doctor's son, so he's Jung's great-grandson, very devoted to his great-grandfather. And Mr. Baumann said that there is another big painting, which is a mural, which Jung executed in Bollingen at the country house. And he says, when we really want to have a great experience, and we in the family, we go over to Bollingen and we look at the painting of Philemon. Besides, he said that I'm convinced that there is something, some spiritual aspect of great-grandfather who is in that house all the time. We can feel him there every time we go there. It was private conversation between us and Mr. Baumann. If I live long enough, I'd like to go to Zurich and see him. He is now, I think, the acting head of the Jung Institute, this young man. And I don't think he's even an analyst, but he manages the institute. In any event, Jung painted these pictures of Philemon. The painting, which is on page 154 of the calligraphed material, has been allowed at an earlier time that picture to be published, that whole page. You find it, for instance, in a kind of a coffee table book that was called C.G. Jung, Word and Image. And there is a nice big page of it there. So I looked at that picture many times, and I said, oh, geez, what a nice... And then, at some point, once again, my good friend and helper, Brian Campbell, took a picture of it. This was before the Red Book was here, and projected it in a very big picture on the screen. And then I discovered that there is a Greek inscription in Greek letters on top, which up to then there was some scribbles there. And it reads in Greek, let me look at it again, Propheten pater pon Philios Philemon, meaning father of the prophets, beloved Philemon. That's in, he wrote in Greek. And I thought to myself, well, you know, one does not write that about what everybody was saying, a mere fantasy figure. You know, I don't think I would. And in addition to that, on the margin of the page, in English, that's the only thing in English in the whole book to my knowledge, probably because this was available in an English translation to him, is the quotation from the Bhagavad-Gita, which probably many of us are familiar with. And it says here, the Bhagavad-Gita says, this is all in English in Jung's calligraphy, whenever whenever then is a decline of the law and an increase of iniquity, then I put forth myself for the rescue of the pious and for the destruction of the evildoers. For the establishment of the law, I am born in every age. Why would he put that? Why would he put that next to the picture of Philemon? if it were not, at least in his estimation, extremely appropriate. So obviously, when he did this painting, Jung was completely convinced that he met a being of momentous importance. And at the same time, yes, it is a being of the psyche, but it is also a being without my psyche. It's there, you know. This one is painted on the last page of the chapter when he encounters Philemon. And then there are further encounters. Geez, the time is going. But this, when you look at page 154, 155, at some point of the calligraph of the German version, then there is something very interesting that a lot of people have missed. You know, there are many pictures in the book that do not directly relate to the text. In fact, the pictures in the book are like a whole other book itself. And so there is a picture on the opposite page that is very, let's say, that, again, it has no, it's not described in the text, let's put it that way. And as some of you see there who have the book, it's large, it's larger than the picture of Philemon even, and it depicts a sort of pillared temple. In the center of the temple stands a gigantic, bigger-than-life feminine figure, and she's veiled, somewhat like a Muslim lady would be veiled. Her eyes and her nose are seen, but not the rest. Behind her is a crescent moon and a light with many light sparks falling down. There are two angels further up in the air, and the temple is filled with a crowd of people who are sort of milling about. And some of them are looking at her, and quite a lot of them are looking away. He has another picture that has the similar theme. And he has people, it indicates that so much of humanity is not looking at the mystical reality that is in front of them, and so many of them look away. There is another one which further on, also a large picture, which has a light, which is sort of the light of God that's coming forth. And there's many, many faces. And some of these are based on real people, you know. And there is a face, that's the face of Sigmund Freud. And as you might guess, he's looking away, you know. And others, that, you know, so that is his symbolism. They are standing, and many of them looking at her, and there is a definite figure there in the, well, in the right-hand corner from the pictures point to the left-hand corner, who is Albert Einstein, and he's looking away. He's not looking at her. And so, you know, people are wondering what is this picture? What does it depict? And you know, I was at one of the lectures after when the exhibit was there, and there were some very knowledgeable people there. They couldn't figure out what the picture means. And there is an inscription in Latin. There is one little part in Arabic, but the rest of it is in Latin that goes all around the picture. And the main portion of that is the one on top. And I translate it freely from the Latin. The wisdom of God, who long ago unaccountably had gone away. Now, wisdom, sapientia, is the Latin form of the Greek Sophia. And then this is reinforced by the rest of the inscriptions on the other two sides, because they are all quotations from the wisdom literature, primarily, I think, from Proverbs and from the Book of Solomon, where it writes about the wisdom, writes about Sophia. You know, so this is obviously a representation of Sophia. You look at it, what is it? Sophia has appeared. She had gone away long ago, but she's back. She stands in the middle of the temple, and some people recognize her, some people look at her, and some people look away. And these two pictures of Philemon and of Sophia are juxtaposed to each other on two pages. Now, you can see that the Philemon picture, after all, it's at the very end of the chapter where he meets Philemon, that belongs there. But the other one is just by itself. Prophecy? I think so. But I don't like to get too concrete about these things, but I think what you have here is the Logos and Sophia, as Philo-Judaeus would have it, the two manifestations of God. There is the wise man, the wise and holy man, old Philemon, and Sophia on the other side. And they have both returned and are in the process of returning, and Jung had obviously met them. How else he would be able to paint their likeness? And very, very interesting. And so there are many things like this which are just, you know, just something that is on a couple of pages and doesn't even relate all that much to the text, but you really have to look at it, and then you will get, you know, certain insights. Now, time is moving, and stomachs are growling, and you know, all kinds of other occult phenomena of that sort by this time of the day. But you know, let's just say that first of all, you know, Philemon is a very, very important figure, and so it's obviously with these quotations from the Bhagavad-Gita and so forth, and the father of the prophets, Jung actually seems to tell that it is an avataric figure. He is at least if not an avatar himself, but a sort of a messenger and a manifestation of the principle that comes to help humanity. And obviously he is conjoined with the figure of Sophia because she is placed on the other side. Why the name Philemon? Well, my Greek advisors, because my Greek is rusty, I had a few semesters, but it's really rusty. Latin I can still deal with very well. But Philemon means the friendly one, the loving one. Philos is the friend, is friend. So it's the friendly one. And there is a figure, and he obviously conjoins it in the text. In mythology, Greek mythology, I think you can look at the reference notes of Chandasani. I think it's by Ovid, one of the Roman poets, and you know, who have taken it from the Greek, is the story of Philemon and Baucis. And the Philemon and Baucis are described as two old people, who living somewhere in the countryside, and meanwhile two gods, Hermes is one of them, are walking around the countryside, and as the Greek gods are wont to do, they have big hats on, and they go around, they don't tell anybody who they are, and the people don't admit them, are not hospitable to them, won't take them into their houses until they come to Philemon's and his wife's house. And Philemon and Baucis were poor old people, total retired people of some sort, old pensioners, living there, and they let them in, and they give them their last food that they have, and they are very, hospitable to them. So the gods reveal themselves to them, and they then they become a priest and the priestess, and their house is turned into a temple, and they live there. That's the old story of Philemon. And this one is joined to it. That's why there is the friendly one, because the friend of the gods, the friendly gods. Well, now, from that time on, from about 155 page of the calligraphed version of the Red Book, Philemon is practically always there, and he gives more and more teachings to Jung, and Jung goes to Philemon's place, which is where he has a beautiful garden. And there are two times when Jung sees a strange apparition. He calls it a blue shade in the garden of Philemon. And it's really the very last page of the third book, which is Scrutinies. It was noon on a hot summer day, and I was taking a stroll in my garden when I reached the shade of the high trees. I met Philemon strolling in the fragrant grass. So this was in Jung's garden. But when I sought to approach him, a blue shade came from the other side, and when Philemon saw him, he said, I find you in the garden, my beloved Lord. The sins of the world have conferred beauty upon your countenance. The suffering of the world has straightened your shape. You are truly a king. Your crimson is blood. Your ermine is snow, and the coldness from the coldness of the poles. Your crown is the heavenly body of the sun which you bear on your head. Welcome to the garden, my master, my beloved, my brother. The blue shade is Jesus, and it's mentioned earlier. The shade replied, O Simon Magus, or whatever your name may be, are you in my garden, or am I in yours? Philemon said, you are, O master, in my garden. Helena, or whatever you choose to call her, and I are your servants. You can find accommodations with us. So once again, he is the one who welcomes the gods. Simon and Helena have become Philemon and Baucis, and so we are the hosts of the gods. We granted hospitality even to the terrible worm, which is a sort of devilish shadow. And since you come forward, we take you in. It is our garden that surrounds you. Now, Simon Magus is often considered the first Gnostic, very, very heretical individual, and his companion was Helen, who was regarded by many as a reincarnation of Helen of Troy. So he identifies Philemon here with Simon, who, however, now has become Philemon, and Helen has become Philemon's wife, Baucis. That, like in many ways, is joined, let's say, to the Gnostic tradition. The shade, who is Jesus, answered, is this garden not mine? Is not the world of the heavens and the spirits my own? Philemon said, you are, O master, here in the world of men. Men have changed, you better believe it, and women too. They are no longer the slaves and no longer the swindlers of the gods and no longer mourn in your name, but they grant hospitality to the gods. The terrible worm came before you, whom you recognized as related to you insofar as you are of divine nature and as your father insofar as you are of human nature. This relates to an earlier story. You dismissed him when he gave you clever counsel in the desert. It's the shadow, it's the devil. You know, he had been there too. You took the counsel but dismissed the worm. He finds a place sometimes with us. But where he is, you will be also. When I was Simon, I sought to escape him with the ploy of magic. Now that I gave the worm a place in my garden, you come to me. The shade answered, do I fall for the power? Have you secretly caught me? And as Philemon answered, recognize, O Master and Beloved, that your nature is also has the nature of the serpent. Were you not raised on the tree like a serpent? Have you laid aside your body like the serpent's skin? Have you not practiced the healing arts like the serpent? Did you not go down to hell before your ascent? And did you not see your brothers there who were shot away in the abyss? Then the shade said, you speak the truth. You are not lying. Even so, do you know what I bring? This I know not, Philemon answered. I know only one thing, that whoever hosts the worm also needs his brother. So this is again the injunction that we have to include the darkness, we have to include the unlived, we have to include the serpent that went down if wholeness is to be established. And one of the arguments of Jung and of Philemon in the Red Book are that one of the mistakes that Christendom has made earlier is that it advocated only goodness and not wholeness. And this rendered, therefore, the Christian message very vulnerable, because where there is no wholeness, then one is very vulnerable to various things, and all kinds of difficulties and wrong-headed things can occur. I know only one thing there, brother. What do you bring me, my beautiful and glorious guest? Lamentation and abomination were the gift of the worm. What will you give us? The shade answered, I bring you the beauty of suffering. That is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. And it's the end of, it's actually the end of the book, because it's the end of book 3 of the scrutinies. And once before, I think then it was in Philemon's garden, very briefly, also the blue shade appears, who is Jesus, and whom Philemon greets. So what you have here is a sort of a symbolic confrontation of the old message of Christianity and of sort of the amendation and the improvement that Philemon is bringing. One of them being that we have to recognize the shadow, and that salvation really consists in wholeness and in the reconciliation of the opposites. But you can see he's very reverential. Philemon is very reverential toward Jesus. So it's certainly not an anti-Jesus or an anti-Christian message. It's only a message that says, you know, some things have to be corrected, some things have to be set right. And we are just about finished. So let me see if there is I will conclude with this. There is a very revealing passage which occurs in one of Jung's notes, and which was written quite a bit later. I will not that much later, in 1922. It's dated in January 5th, 1952, which is sort of a final conversation, as far as we know, there may have been others not written down, of Jung with his soul. And that concerns the publication of the Red Book, actually, and beyond it, the proclamation of the message. And I will quote, it's longer than this, but I quote these excerpts at this point. The soul says to Jung in 1922, "The great work begins." Jung, what great work? Soul, the work that should now be undertaken. It is a great and difficult work. Jung, what is it? Speak. Soul, you shall listen. To no longer be a Christian is easy. But what next? This is the question that could be addressed to our culture. All right, so you guys want to be secular? What next? What have you got? You know, for more is yet to come. Everything is waiting for you, but you should speak. And I think the speaking means you should get this message out, you know. Jung says rather pitifully at the end of a longer sentence, "But what is my calling?" The soul, the new religion and its proclamation. Jung says, "Oh God, how should I do this?" So the soul says, "Do not be of such little faith. No one knows it as you do. There is no one who could say it as well as you do." It says, you know, go ahead and do something about it. And of course, he was very torn because he was afraid to publish the Red Book. But then he found channels such as alchemy and others, and now the book itself had been published. And then the soul has one more statement. "You know everything that is to be known about the manifest revelation, but you do not yet live everything that is to be lived at this time. The way is symbolic." A little bit cryptic. So then, what can we say in conclusion? I think we can say that the soul was undoubtedly right. And because no one has said it probably as well as he did, at least not up to this time, as Jung did. And we have seen and heard it from him and from his pen, actually from his pen, from his magical book with the red cover, from his astonishing calligraphy, from his sublime pictures, and from his translated words. And through these, of course, from his master Philemon, the embodiment of Simon Magus. And those of us who, among whom I think, number myself, who think that we follow really the path of Simon Magus in the Gnostic tradition and others, I think we have heard, and we will continue to learn, and we will not forget. And so perhaps to us, like to him, it's being said at this time, the great work begins. And whether this is chronological or whether it is purely symbolic, we don't know. But it doesn't really matter. Because if we do the work, then it's going to happen. And it's going to happen as it ought to happen. And with that, I'll conclude. Yes, please. I'm not going to clap for myself. Yeah, there is a...
I just wondered if you would comment a little bit on his script. When I'm reading it seems like, like the thes, the der, die, and das, he's got some kind of his own shorthand. It's in
you're right, you're right.
And so the thing is as I read through it, if I would turn and go to a new section, like what I was reading, and then I'd flip back in the book, if I read really fast, I could get a couple of lines in the German before my mind clicked back in and said, "Oh no, you don't know how to read this."
Well, yeah.
So I wondered what other kinds.
I think you have very much the same experience as I do. And German is my second native language. I learned German when I was a little kid. My German is still really good, But for one thing, the language, the German that he uses is a slightly archaic German. It would take a philologist to tell about what part of the history of the German languages goes back to. I would sort of guess it is maybe early 18th century German. And then there are abbreviations in it which you have to figure out. Right. And they're the kind of abbreviations that you find in old codices, Latin codices and so forth, where you know that a word is abbreviated, and what the heck is this? So that part of it is difficult. But I assure you, both from my knowledge of German and from my careful study of the text, that from what I have seen, the translation by Shamdasani is really good. And you know, we can work with that, and I think the calligraphy part is mainly valuable to us by way of the pictures, because the pictures in themselves are to use that 60s term, real mind blowers, and they really take you to places. In a few months we will have probably available a 3-part video programs, about 3-hour video programs that I did with the pictures, where I tried to explain as much as I could. There are some that you just have to look at. Some of those mandalas you just have to look at and they'll do something to you. But others have fairly distinct meanings, at least some of them that you can read into. So I would say not to worry too much about the calligraphed text.
Speaking of the pictures, do you think the picture of Sophia next to Philemon has anything to do or suggest a relationship between wisdom and compassion? Because that seems to be a...
Yeah, sure. I think this is more like a Greek lady who was present at my lecture in Ojai last April, and this says, it's the Logos and Sophia, you know, with real Greek fervor, you know. And I think she's right. So the one is the Philemon, the master of magic, is the Logos. It is the power of consciousness and the articulated thought of the divine. And then Sophia is the more mellow part. You know, it's you might say that that is really wisdom combined with compassion. So there's 2 great principles which apparently, according to the Red Book, are here, and we can relate ourselves to them. So you're pretty much up in the right direction there.
Mm-hmm. You and our mutual friend, Dr. Lance Owens, have lectured extensively on Tolkien, and it seems like their journeys are remarkably similar.
Absolutely.
Their inward turning processes, the imagery that they brought forth, the effects of World War I. Do you think that was just a happy synchronicity in terms of their creative output, or is there any indication they mutually informed each other's work during that period?
Well, I don't believe that they knew each other, and I doubted that they even knew much about each other. But what they did, I think, in their own way was very similar, and you're quite right. In fact, both of them started on their journey, so to say, into the inner worlds in the same year. In the same year. So there are astonishing parallels, and at one, I lectured on one of them, and I personally feel that, you know, they are the 2 great lights of the 20th and possibly the 21st century. They did it differently. One of them worked strictly, you might say strictly as a myth. I wouldn't even call Tolkien a myth maker, but a myth revealer, you know, and the other one worked partly mythologically, partly psychologically, but I think that there is really a close parallel, and there is a relationship. I think that my friend Lance Owens is absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
If I heard you correctly, you said that Tolkien was more of a myth revealer. Is that what you said just now?
Myth revealer, yeah.
And it's been said that part of the problem with our time and our humanity and our culture is that we don't have a myth for our time. As you were going through this today, I mean, this sounds like this is the myth, and I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, this is certainly a myth and maybe the myth of our times. I think that if Joseph Campbell were still around, I think he would be very excited by this, because that's what he was always saying, that we are a mythless culture now, and that something's got to happen. And yes, I think the Red Book, if properly handled and understood, is probably a very important myth for our times.
I don't know if we can do this very quickly, but would you like to compare and contrast Jung and Philemon with Blavatsky and Moria?
With Blavatsky and Moria, yes. Yes, I think that there is definitely there is the revealer, the one who writes and speaks, and the one who inspires him.
Or contrast?
Excuse me?
Contrast, perhaps? What's the difference?
The contrast between the two approaches? Well, look, one revelation occurred at the end of the 19th century, right about the time when Jung was born, and the other one, a good deal later, and is now being publicized later. There are obviously differences in terms of culture, in terms of time, and in terms of the mythos, but I think there's a considerable similarity. Maybe Jung, because it has already been done, let's say, too, did not go into the tremendous amount of cosmological and cosmogonic material, which sort of becomes the framework for Blavatsky's mysticism, really. And he did not, although, and I would be very remiss if I didn't say about it, in the last book, in Scrutinies, this is really where it first was written to, is the 7 Sermons to the Dead, which is very cosmological in a mystical sort of sense. There is even a great big diagram with it, and it's only a little different from the one that Jung allowed to be published, and on which I wrote a book in the 1960s. One of just about the only difference is that while in the previously published version, it's Basilides who utters the sermons to the dead, here it is Philemon. And after each sermon, Philemon gives a little commentary. So this is where it was originally, and then Jung felt, well, this is such a nice little scripture in itself, and then he privately had it published. I want you to know that I have a copy that was sent to me by Jung's son, Franz, who when he received the German translation of my 7 sermons, then he sent me that with a letter, and he said that you have represented my father's position with great accuracy, and we still have a few copies, and I have his letter too, we still have a few copies of this, and you should have one, and I got it. Now, of course, Franz Jung has also passed away. He was the head of the family and the guardian of all of these things. So that is a little more Blavatskyan in the sense that it talks about sort of cosmological matters, how the universal mundus totius, as he calls it, called the diagram, the schema mundi, the scheme of the total world, or of the worlds. So that's a little more, there's a little more there along that line, but on the other, the Red Book itself does not deal with things like that. And perhaps the demands, certainly the demands of today are very different from Blavatsky's. So there is a similarity and there is a dissimilarity, both.